Welcome, everyone. It's lovely to be with you this evening. My name is Alicia McBride. I'm the Director of Quaker Leadership at FCNL, and I'm really excited to be with all of you. Thank you for sharing where you're joining us from. It's great to have friends from all across the country with us, and to be part of this conversation with two friends who are working for change on the inside by serving in public office. Before we begin, I want to just take a few moments to ground us in some silence. Thank you, friends. Thank you for being here again. So I'd like to welcome you to our latest event in our monthly Quaker Changemakers series, which brings individual friends witness in the world into conversation with FCNL's Quaker advocacy work. The nationwide protests decrying police brutality and systemic racism, the inequalities and challenges exposed in the COVID pandemic, all of this reminds us that there are many ways to speak truth to power. So you can demonstrate, you can contact your members of Congress, you can lobby, you can vote, and you can run for office. So tonight I'm excited to talk with two friends who have run for and hold elected office in their communities, and to talk about how their decision to run and what their experience has been like as advocates and as friends. Before I introduce our guests, I want to introduce Bobby Trice, who will share a little bit of information about the logistics and technology of our event.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alicia, and welcome again, friends. I'm Bobby, and I'm the Quaker Engagement Associate here at FCNL. I'll be running technology tonight and monitoring the chat. And as we just get settled in and wait for a few more attendees to trickle into the webinar, I want to draw your attention to a few technical features of Zoom. So of course we have the chat bar, which many of you have already used to introduce yourself and send us greetings. Thank you. Just want to give everyone a small reminder to remember to address your messages to all panelists and attendees so that we can all see the rich discussion taking place in the chat. And as the discussion evolves tonight, please do submit your questions for our panelists. We'll have a period of question and answer with the audience after the discussion, and I'll be relaying those questions from the chat to our panelists. So when you're submitting a question, it would be great if you could just include your location and your meeting or church affiliation, if you have any, so that we can name you and that affiliation when you are submitting your question. And if you're calling in on the phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand, and we will call on you to give your question in a different way. So with that, I think I'll turn it back to Alicia. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Bobby. So I'm going to introduce our speakers. Jasmine Krotkov currently represents the 25th District of Montana in the state legislature. Previously, she spent 20 years working with the U.S. Postal Service, and she represents North Pacific Yearly Meeting on FCNL's General Committee. Michael Snarr is a member of the Wilmington, Ohio City Council. He teaches political science at Wilmington College and regularly provides off-campus experiences, including bringing students to FCNL's Spring Lobby Weekend. And he represents Wilmington Yearly Meeting on FCNL's General Committee. So to start off, maybe we'll start with Jasmine. If you can talk about what led you to run for office?
Well, I'd say spirit led me to run for office. I know that I would not have run for office if I didn't have Quakers around me, because my experience in FCNL lobbying gave me the confidence to know that I could speak my truth cogently and earnestly. And so when the opportunity arose, when I saw somebody else considering running for office in Montana, and it occurred to me that, oh, I could do that. Never, what? Because I was not drawn to be a politician by any means before that. And so after I had that idea planted in my head, I did a lot of thinking about it and got a clearness committee about it and whatnot, and really felt that that was my leading, was to offer what I have to give through this position.
Great. Michael, how would you respond to that question?
Well, I wish I could say it was the spirit that led me, but I don't think it was. That's a better story. What happened for me as a political science professor, I had never been interested in being involved in politics. I mean, I study it enough to know that I don't want to be involved in it. However, 2 years ago, a group of local Democrats came to me and said, hey, the person representing your ward has moved out of the ward and we need to appoint someone, or the opposing party will get to appoint someone. And I said, heck no, that's not my problem. Figure it out. Sorry. 2 weeks later, they came back and said, listen, we've asked people and we can't find anyone. And I said, no way. Third time when they came back, I still was not interested. But at that point, I did get a few people from across the aisle that asked me to go ahead and not run, but be appointed. And at that point, I realized that maybe this wasn't going to be as, that terrible partisan politics that I had feared. That's what I didn't want to be part of. And so I reluctantly agreed and have not regretted it at all. So not the spirit, sort of kicking and screaming.
Well, I don't know. Sometimes the spirit can move through other people.
Okay.
So I wouldn't discount discount that as a possibility.
All right, externally then, not internally.
Maybe this time, Michael, we'll start with you. How does being a friend or part of a Quaker organization shape your work and your expectations about how you interact with other people on the city council and with people in your community?
I would say that more than anything, my first impulse is toward bringing together the stakeholders and not necessarily pushing a certain position, but trying to achieve consensus. It was not something I really had thought about until I was invited to be part of this, and I started reflecting. It's like, that's what I do. My first impulse is, let's get the stakeholders at the table. Let's not try to ram something through. Of course, I'm in the minority party, so that's not going to happen anyway. But it's always, how can we hear from various groups and bring them together and seek consensus?
Jasmine?
I think the way that being a Quaker shapes my work is more about just speaking my values. That's what I learned from lobbying with FCNL, and that's what I go back to all the time when I'm in any kind of situation, like speaking in a committee meeting or speaking on the House floor or speaking with stakeholders and whatnot. I think it's less about, building consensus and more about just speaking the truth as I see what's true for me and what's true for my constituents and true from my perspective about the situation at hand. And I really find that I get good results from that, because a lot of people, I think, they're so focused on strategy and on, trying to win, to achieve some goal. And that they lose sight of what they value in the situation. So when I just speak about what is true for me and speak about the truth wherever it is that I find it, that enables people to come together. And one example of this was recently I was in a Law and Justice Interim Committee meeting, and we're working on a bill to provide compensation for people who are wrongfully convicted and serve prison sentences. So instead of having them have to get released and then have to file a lawsuit, we're going to create a program to just compensate them appropriately. And in that committee meeting, when we were writing that bill, I kept saying, we need to say right out front that the purpose of this is to recognize that these people have been wronged and that the state did this wrongly and that we're sorry and we'd like to make it better. And everybody on that committee was just like, no, you can't say that because, somebody will take that into committee and change it and they'll blah, 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 worry about the outcomes. But then in the end, my concern does get incorporated in what is in the language that goes into the bill in a way that it wouldn't have had I just tried to strategize and get people on that, to support my position, etc. So being a Quaker, it shapes my work insofar as I don't have to, I can just speak the truth and it's going to work out fine. It's going to lead to the right. Having that faith gives me a grounding that really helps other people to join on board. And it shapes my interactions with other lawmakers and with constituents because everybody is kind of surprised or, they hear that I'm a Quaker and they're like, oh, do you have a little hat or something? And what, because they don't know what it means. And then with the other lawmakers on the right, they wonder if I'm some sort of secret agent because, oh, you're religious, so you might be on our side. And they're like, oh, maybe, are you pro-life? Whatever, they think I'm a secret agent. And that helps me connect with them because then they want to know more and I get to talk to them about what we both believe in and what we both share. And then on the left, they wonder if I'm a secret agent and it sets me apart from them because they're like, oh, wait a minute, are you really going to be as progressive as we want you to be? So it's very interesting how being a Quaker is taken by other lawmakers and my constituents. That was a long answer.
Well, you're getting into the next question as well, so that's good. Remember, if you have questions that you would like either Jasmine or Michael or both of them to address, please put them in the chat, address them to the whole group, and we will get to those in a little bit. But that does lead very well into the next question, which maybe Michael you can address. So are there questions that people ask when they find out that you're a Quaker or that they want to talk to you about, particularly because you have that identity that has led to anything? And how do you answer those questions?
Yeah, I'm in a real unique situation, quite different from Jasmine's in that the Quaker Meeting House is 100 yards from where City Council meets. There are actually 4 out of the 7 members of City Council are Quaker. I'm the only one that really is incorporated with and works with FCNL. But every vote, I've been on council a year and a half now, and every vote has been 7-0. So there's no surprise that I'm a Quaker. Everyone knows what that means. This is a fairly Quaker town. There are several meetings, so it's not a big surprise to people. And it's not a contentious city council. Again, every vote has been 7-0, so we all get along pretty well. 3 of us worship at Wilmington Friends meeting, 1 at campus meeting. So it's just a very different situation.
Jasmine, do you have any other insight onto how do you talk with people who are curious about Quakers?
I usually, when somebody asks me, you know, what does that mean? What's a Quaker? I can always start by saying that I'm just motivated to respond to that of God in everyone. That, of course, is a good way to open up that conversation. And that I'm guided by letting my life speak, not necessarily my doctrine speak for me, and valuing truth no matter where it comes from. And with any of those sort of entry-level statements, that sort of paves the way so they can ask me what they really want to know. Because usually they don't really want to know about what I believe. They want to know what side I'm on.
Great, thank you. So some people on this call tonight might be thinking, especially given everything that's going on in our country, about running for office and thinking about changing things in that way. What kind of advice would you have for someone who might be thinking about whether they should run for office? Jasmine, why don't we start with you?
My advice is do it, especially because at the state legislature level and what I hear from Michael at the city and state level, politics is not nearly as adversarial as it seems to be in the media. It really isn't. I have yet to be offered anything by a lobbyist. And by the way, if there's any lobbyists on this call, I could be, oh, no. It's really not that adversarial. It's not that disgusting as we think it is, or as I thought it was before I got into it. But my advice would be to definitely get a clearness committee to make sure that you're in this to do, that it is a leading for you to do, unless it's your business or your career anyway. But if it's not a career, if you're considering it, definitely get a clearness committee. Get an anchoring committee, rinse and repeat. Just keep connected to your support, your spiritual support, so that you're always feeling supported and able to speak your truth.
Good advice on a number of fronts. Michael, what would you say?
I'll be a hypocrite and say make sure the Spirit is leading you. Because I mean, it for me, it's been a good experience, but there are some issues. I mean, you do have to have thick skin to some extent, and that hasn't been a huge issue for me. But I tell you, probably the most frustrating thing, and I imagine this will happen to most people in politics, is that you get on the social media and you see what people are saying, and you think, where did you get that from? Just people speculating from the outside and coming up with ridiculous sort of reasons why you're doing this or that. I haven't been at the center of that too much, but it's happened a couple times on council. We had a photographer come in and take pictures for us, and a month later it was on social media that city council had done this and that to them. It's like, from what I could tell, none of it was true. People just make things up, and probably doesn't surprise you if you're on social media. But do know that sort of thing is going to happen, and you probably have to have some thick skin, or at least get rid of your social media account. Also, in many cases, you're going to have to raise some money, which was not that much fun for me. And knocking on doors. Some people like it. Some people don't necessarily. It wasn't my favorite thing, because most of the time I'd go out on a weekend, and Saturday afternoon during the Ohio State football game, I'm knocking on a door and I can hear it playing in the background, and they're inside the house, and I'm thinking, I am not who they want to see when they leave the football game to see who's at the door. So a few, not terrible things, but it's not all easy. I mean, raising money, dealing with social media, that sort of thing can be a little rough.
So I want to turn now to interactions you had with people. Well, in Michael's case, you were appointed, so maybe this may not apply as much. But Jasmine, when you were running for office, how did the interactions that you had with constituents and potential voters influence what you were thinking of doing when you were elected?
You know, when I was running for office, as I'm doing now, because I have to get reelected every 2 years, when running for office, the voter interaction it's all about them. It's all about letting them tell me what they need, right? And what letting them tell me what they need me to hear, because they don't feel like they have been heard. So I just let them tell me, or, you know, try and create that opening so that they feel that they can, you know, that I am willing to listen to whoever and about whatever issue, and make sure that I get back to them on whatever it is that they've told me about, so they know I'm following up, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, that just sort of pours into me as what's important for my constituency. And so it's like the first time I ran for office, I didn't have any plan for bills that I wanted to run, or any, you know, everybody would ask you, what's your, what are you passionate about? And I'm like, well, peace and social justice, which is pretty broad. So my voters' interactions have not really changed my priorities, because they're really the same. My priorities and my constituents' priorities are the same. I think as I got into the legislature and I saw how it worked, my expectations changed about what I could do. And now my priorities are all about just getting that values message out there. I also am in the minority, so I'll never get stuff passed. I mean, I got bills passed, but nothing controversial and nothing, you know, truly values-based, more, as we say, cat and dog kind of bills. But so what I have to do in the legislature now is speak those values in committee meetings, on the House floor, speaking the truth and saying, I heard you, to my constituents. So repeating what they have told me and saying, yes, see, I'm publicizing this for you, and saying these truths out loud on the microphone, on the record. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, that's great. Michael, do you want to say anything about your interaction with your constituents?
Sure, I'll just say a little. I will say that I was appointed for a year, and then I did have to run and get elected this last term. So I'm in the middle of that term. And after I decided I was going to go ahead and do this, I immediately started thinking, you know, what is it I want to do? And it really, similar experience, my interests, my concerns coincided with the people who, you know, the people I was knocking on doors of. The situation here, the issues, opioid issues and homelessness. I'm also on the board of a ministry that works with some of those issues. So that was the issue I was interested in. And I was surprised to some extent that that was the issue that almost everyone that had a specific issue they were concerned about, that was the issue they were concerned about. So that was good, and made sort of my entry into things easy, because we had shared concerns.
Yeah, it's probably good to get that reinforcement in addition to getting new issues.
Right.
So I'm going to ask you all one more question from me, and then I know we've had a number of questions come in from people on the call. Remember, you can keep putting them in the chat, and we'd be happy to get through as many as we can. So we'll start with Michael this time. How has your experience being lobbied by your own constituents affected how you think about your own lobbying and advocacy with FCNL or in other contexts?
Yeah, it's had a lot of impact. I'm glad you asked that, because it's one that immediately I thought, yes, this has had a big impact. And it's really interesting to be on the other side. And when I am in a conversation where I'm on the other side, I am totally sure to be actively listening and making sure they feel heard, genuinely feel heard, because most my lobby visits with FCNL have been good, but occasionally you get that the representative or the staffer who clearly is not interested, and it's a real deflating experience. And so I don't want that to happen. And so I just make sure I'm listening, make sure they're feeling heard. And then, as Jasmine was saying, make sure you follow up so that they know you're doing more than just hearing them, you're acting upon it.
Great. Jasmine, how would you say being on both sides of the lobbying table has influenced you?
Well, as I said, I don't get lobbied much. However, I did have one experience where I did a really poor job as a lobbyee. I was once again on the Law and Justice Interim Committee, and we were considering a bill, and somebody from the Innocence Project called me up. And this kid, he was a young guy, he calls me up at home at 9 o'clock at night and just starts sort of badgering me about we're having a hearing the next day. We weren't even going to vote on this. So the poor young man didn't know how it worked, right? He didn't have FCNL behind him, giving him the how this lobbying visit's going to go and what to say first and to say thank you. He had just heard that you should, he needs to get me on the record saying I'm going to vote this way or that way on this bill. And I kept telling him, we're not voting on the bill tomorrow. We're just hearing it. We're just discussing it. And he just didn't understand. And in the end, I said, dude, you called me up at 9 o'clock at night and are asking me for things that I can't tell you, right? And I was not proud of that response. And he got kind of, he was like, well, you're supposed to be responsive to the constituents and stuff. So that made me understand, though, how well FCNL prepares your lobby visits. And how that is such a wonderful setup for everything. I mean, I use the lobby visit roadmap myself when I'm talking to other lawmakers about, do you want to join me on working on this legislation, right? And I kind of use that myself. And I know that as a representative now, I never thought about how it would be, as a lobbyist, you think about, trying to get that representative to say something, to commit one way or the other. And I guess I never really thought about how that felt to the representative. And now I know, and it's all fair game. That's all fair. That's the way the game is played.
Well, I'm really glad that the roadmap is proving useful, even internally. So we've had a lot of great questions come in on the chat, so I'm going to start with some of those. Sarah asks, how do you manage work and family commitments and political engagement? And maybe as part of this, I'm sure the city council is not a full-time job, and I don't know how the Montana legislature works. How much of your time is spent with the legislature versus other things that you're doing? Maybe, Michael, do you want to start?
Yeah, I will say that it's not a really big time commitment. It's the first and third Thursday night. Usually lasts about an hour and a half. We have a subcommittee or two right before, which are a half hour to an hour. There's not a lot of work in between, but you do have to keep those nights open, and there is some conversation back and forth in between. So it hasn't been a real big time commitment, but I already had plenty to do before that, so a little bit. One way I justify it is, I mean, I feel like I'm doing good stuff in the community for sure. We do get a small stipend, and I put that goes straight into the savings for vacation. So I keep pointing that to that for kids and my wife. I was like, hey, we're going to go to the beach in 2 years because of this. But it's been really nice to be part. I mean, prior to all this, I lived in my college bubble. Like I did not get out of off campus much, so I didn't know what was going on in town. And so it's been really nice to make to do that and meet some people that I had not crossed paths with before, and see more of a holistic college community interaction. And we're dealing with a lot of the same issues, so it's been good.
Jasmine, what about you?
Well, the Montana legislature only meets every other year, and we meet for 90 days in Helena. So you have to move there and rent another house or room or something. And it's very disruptive to people with children. I mean, you really can't do it. If you were a single parent, you could not do it. And we get paid $11 an hour. So it actually costs me money to serve because I have to maintain 2 households. And while you're there for those 3 months, it is 5 in the morning until 8, 9, 10 at night, every day. So it's a huge commitment, and it's very hard for families. It's very hard for people who have their own business or have a job that they, where they can't just put it on hold for 3 months. I have been very grateful to this new work at home ethos. I'm getting so much more done on Zoom. I mean, today I was on 4 different webinars learning all about juvenile justice, and it's like I could have all of these places, these conferences I could have traveled to, but I'm just getting them right at home. I'm hoping that in the future we can do more hybrid online and in-person meetings, and that would really take some of the pressure off.
Yeah, you don't always think about the logistics of serving in office. So it's really helpful to hear that. So Maurice Warner from Salmon Bay Meeting in Seattle asks, how do you balance political pragmatism and Quaker idealism? Jasmine, do you want to start with that one?
I don't feel like I have to. I feel like that's kind of a false choice, because political pragmatism, well, part of it is being in the minority. I'm never going to be I'm not going to be in a position to have an ideal bill that, that I'll be asked to compromise on. I think Quakerism is very pragmatic. That we have to deal with the world that we have here, not the world that we wish was here, or, it's all pragmatism. So I don't really see that as an either or I see that as they're complementary.
Michael, what do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think this is where I'll give, I'll say FCNL has really helped a lot for this, I feel like. I feel like when we go and lobby it with FCNL, whether it's Spring Lobby Weekend or sometimes we take other groups from the college, that is what we do. We have our ideals, we know what we want, but we also know unless we figure out what's possible in the political climate, we're not going to get it done. So pragmatism is pretty much ingrained in me, and I think a lot of that is just experiences with FCNL. And so I don't dwell on, wringing my hands thinking, oh, we should do more. I know what's possible with the group that's at council and the mayor, and we work with that.
Great. So Jeff and Yvonne Gritzner from Missoula Monthly Meeting ask, what do you find the most frustrating part, they say, of serving in the legislature, but I guess broaden it to serving in the office that you hold. Michael, do you want to start? Michael, you're muted, sorry.
Sorry, I think I mentioned a few of those earlier. The main ones are like the campaigning and having to raise money, although I didn't have to raise a lot. Just seeing the wild speculation with no basis from social media. And once in a while, we'll get someone come in angry to city council and they just don't know, they haven't researched, they don't know what's going on. They've heard rumors and they come in, guns a-blazing and they don't know. So just lack of education on some of the things. I guess that because we've been a collegial bunch, group of council men and women, it hasn't been too bad. So hasn't been too frustrating.
Good to hear it. Jasmine?
At this point in my tenure, I would say that what frustrates me the most is that most of the people who are working on legislation, either as legislators or as lobbyists or as advocates, or even on the staff side, they're all the smartest people in the room. They're the ones who are all class presidents. You have 150 class presidents. And they tend to be focused on, or not always, but often there's a focus on winning and on strategy rather than on getting things like the best policy passed, the best we can do passed. There's the focus on winning frustrates me. I think earlier my frustration was different. It changes every 5 minutes.
Yeah, if I could add to what I said before, another thing is, and this goes back to the pragmatism issue, is that a frustration is that when we deal with issues, whether it's water usage or other things like that, we're usually dealing with a very narrow range of options. We're not really thinking outside of the box often. So it's, shall we do A, B, or C? And they're all in a very narrow framework of solutions. We're not really doing anything radical or dramatic that could be a better solution. Usually we're just making very minor changes.
Well, go ahead.
That was a great point, Michael. We're just the little guy running around with a little oil can, just oiling stuff, whereas we want to create a whole new machine. Yeah.
Well, that actually leads into a question that Christine Ashley, now in Saxapaha, I'm sorry, Christine, I don't know how to pronounce it, North Carolina, asks, which is, how do you break through business as usual, both in the campaign process and after you're elected? Jasmine?
Business as usual, I can take that to mean the way, like in campaigning, I'm always having to fight with my supporters, not my supporters, but like the Democratic Party, who want to run campaigns as though I was Hillary Clinton and had the entire, had to use big data for the entire country, whereas I only have 10,000 constituents and I can literally knock on every door and talk to every constituent. So that business, breaking through that kind of business as usual is a lot easier once you've been elected, because then you can just say, I've done this before and I know how it works. Thank you for your suggestion. The business as usual in the legislature, I think I break through that just by, once again, bringing up values, speaking about, hey, this does not provide, this policy does not provide for justice. This policy provides for retribution, not justice. And, you know, that I think breaks through to people who might have more power to actually make differences.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Christine, if you'd asked me 3 weeks ago, I'd have said, I have no idea. I'll let you know when I figure it out. But I think I'm in the middle of doing what I maybe breaking out of business as usual. It has to do with another question that's on the board now with regards to race and policing. So obviously something needs to change. And so I'm working with one other council member and the Wilmington College multicultural director to pull together a group of minority leaders to have a forum, which includes the police chief and the mayor. And so I think, or my hope is that to get beyond business as usual, we've got to do something more than just that narrow range of issues that we've mentioned before, but bring in some different ideas, try to create some outside energy. Of course, this topic is hot now, and so that facilitates this, but bringing in other voices. When it's just the 7 of us on council and the mayor, and we've already got, you know, the policies options are on the table, not much changes, it's business as usual. But in this case, I'm hoping that we'll get some good feedback. I'm sure we will. We've got some great leaders we're gonna pull together tomorrow evening. Hopefully that will lead to some ideas and some policy breakthroughs maybe. So hopefully that is getting beyond business as usual.
Thank you, Michael. So that does raise the question that L. Pickles asked, which is how have you had to address these issues of police violence, police brutality, police funding, and also the COVID virus? Jasmine, do you want to talk about how that's affected your work?
Well, we have not had to address that yet because we're not in session. On the Law and Justice Interim Committee, we do address those issues, and we have in the past, addressed funding for who the post, which is the police officers, public officers, the organization that will that chastises public officers who do wrong. We have adjudicated who they report to, et cetera, et cetera. And I know there's going to be opportunities to address the police brutality. We've already been addressing police singling out Native Americans for pulling over and, the mass incarceration of Native Americans. But Montana has as a rural state, we don't have the same kind of policing that they have in big cities. So the way that we address this is going to be very different than it's being addressed in New York City, for example.
Great. Just a few more questions and then we'll wrap things up. So here's a question from Diane Randall. She asks if you will share a political discussion or a vote on an issue where you felt ethically challenged. Do you have an example of that? Jasmine, do you want to start?
Ethically challenged. The only thing that's coming to me right now is a bill that we had in the last legislature that was sponsored by a outside organization. It was a abortion bill, a heartbeat bill that really spoke against my principles. And we had a policy discussion with Planned Parenthood and some other advocates about how to respond to this. And I felt really strongly that I needed to speak out on the floor about the fact that they brought this bill had nothing to do with the principles that they said that they were, as you know, that this was about. The reason to bring the bill was about a federal issue, and they were just wanted to pave the way by having it passed in as many state houses as possible. And that the bill itself characterized me as an evil person because I disagree with their definition of when life begins. And I felt really strongly that I had to stand up on the floor and say that. And I got chastised by the Speaker of the House and told to sit down. And then one of the best parts was when one of my colleagues, a young woman, she's in her 20s, she's one of the youngest legislators there, and she texted me right away, "Wow, if you get chewed out by the Speaker of the House, you must be doing something right." So I don't know. I don't think that was the question that Diane asked, though. And I'm not thinking of a time when I felt like I had to do something, that I was being called to do something that I didn't want to do, that I thought was ethically wrong. So
I think it speaks to maybe the flip side of the question of doing something that you feel is ethically correct, even when it's not what you're supposed to be doing necessarily. Michael, do you have any thoughts on this question?
Not necessarily for something I traditionally think is as a moral issue per se, but I did have one sort of situation where it was a bit of a quandary. On the main drag with all the fast food restaurants, the mayor wanted to put in a median, which the idea was it was going to make the pathways, the highway safer. So there was that sort of moral issue. On the other side of the issue were the businesses, the business owners all along the strip, and they would show up, they packed the room for city council, several council meetings in a row, and they were very outspoken, and they came with statistics and studies, and the Wendy's and the Taco Bell and the rest said, "We will be out of business by X date if you do this." And I was a little bit petrified because here I am thinking I'm between safety and, losing all, every business elite in town is going to hate me on the other side. And then as I started doing my own research, because I know nothing about medians and that sort of thing, I started doing research and reading the peer-reviewed studies, and they all were saying the same thing, and that was the business owners will get upset, but they're not going to lose business. I was like, oh dear, how do I tell them this? How do I get up and say that? Listen, you need to look at peer-reviewed research, not your research from the industry. And so I was in the middle, Diane, of what I thought was a moral, terrible political dilemma, and luckily the mayor caved on it and it didn't come up for vote. He made a compromise with the business owners, and so I didn't have to jump in. I mean, I didn't have to show my cards at all on that one, and I was still trying to figure out what to do. It also turned out that the medians, it was going to be very difficult for emergency vehicles to get through if there was traffic, so it wasn't quite as safe as it seemed to be. So I got off the hook, but it was a touch and go there for a little while.
You probably didn't realize research on medians was part of what you were doing as an elected official.
Thankfully I can read research, but I had no idea what to expect before. But it was really interesting how it almost all lined up. Florida, the Texas study, the Idaho study, they all lined up and even had that commentary. The business owners are going to get really upset. They're going to tell you this, but it just doesn't work out that way.
Well, I want to ask one more question of each of you and then give you a chance to share any parting words. So last question is from Ashley Wilson, who asks, how has being a local elected official influenced your relationship with your members of Congress in Washington, D.C.? Michael, do you want to start with that one?
Only one time has it really made a difference. I was asked by FCNL to set up a meeting with our Senate office, one of our Senate offices, and so for the first time, I lobbied, saying, "I'm Michael Snarr, I'm City Council, and these are the issues we're facing at home." So in a sense, it was a different approach, and I was thrilled. I mean, usually when I make those appointments for Spring Lobby Weekend, it takes about 3 weeks to nail it down. I got a call the next day, and we had a meeting within 2 days. So I don't know if that was just luck or I'm more important now, but I felt, even when I was talking to them, I felt like, I'm also a policymaker too now. And so I don't know if there was like a little camaraderie there or what it was, but it did help, I think, help get the meeting sooner and give me a perspective and maybe a little leverage that I didn't have before.
What about you, Jasmine? How has your role influenced your interactions with your members of Congress?
Oh, it's been wonderful. One of our senators, Senator Steve Daines, well, actually both senators have come to the legislature to give an address of one way or the other, and I get selected to walk them up the aisle, as it were, and I can call the staff, any of his staff in Montana, and get a meeting right away, get an answer right away, no problem. Just say, my name is Representative Jasmine Krotkov, although they also know me from my FCNL lobbying. So, and they know me when I first decided to run for office. I happened to go to Washington for something or other, and I was at the Wednesday breakfast that Montana, the representative and the 2 senators put on, and I asked each and every one of them, so I'm planning to run for office in Montana. Do you have any advice for me? And they all gave me their advice, which was very telling about who they are. So I had that connection with them. And now, like, I'm working on a veterans bill that is dovetailing with some national legislation. And, basically I went to John Tester's office and he assigned me 3 staff members to help. I'm like, this doesn't suck. This is great.
So it's an endorsement of running for office to aid your own lobbying in addition to the change that you can make. Well, I thank you again so much for spending this time, and I've seen some kind words coming through the chat as well for sharing so much insight and honesty about this. I just want to give you both a chance, if you have any final words to share with the group before we wrap up. Jasmine?
I just want everybody to know that my faith in democracy is stronger now that I have been on this side of the meat grinder. And I hope that everybody takes the time to get involved, because that strengthens our democracy even more. The only way that we'll wind up as an autocracy is if people just sit on their hands.
Final words from Michael?
I would say, I just reiterate what I've said a couple times already. If you've been lobbying with FCNL, you are on your way to, it will help you, I think, in a local political position. In the ways that I'd said, as far as lobbying and knowing how to approach your representative, but also I know when I first got involved, some of the first issues when I'm sitting on council were awful, just boring, nothing. You know, I teach international politics, FCNL lobbying's on national, you know, sexy issues. And some of these were awful about wastewater treatment and that sort of thing. That was one of the first things I did, was take a tour of the plant and talk about the meat grinder. Ooh, that was awful. But then within a few weeks, a few meetings, we had issues like infrastructure being outdated because the storms were getting worse. And so like climate change, actually, you know, I knew that, but I didn't think I'd be dealing with that on a local level in council, but, you know, realizing that the climate issues, global and national climate issues, affect local. The other one was with Jim Kason's help at FCNL, I had taken Wilmington College agriculture students out to DC to lobby on algal blooms. And so that came up one day because our water supply had algal bloom issues. And I like raised my hand, like for the first time, I was like, I know what this is about. And so it's neat and interesting how some of the local, national, international issues interplay and are interconnected. So that's a nice thing about even local politics.
Well, thank you again so much. It's been really insightful, and I've learned so much just from hearing about your experience. We really appreciate you being here tonight, and thank you to everybody who's participated, but the fun is not over yet. Bobby Trice is going to take over and show you a few tools on FCNL's website that can be helpful as you're thinking about advocating or engaging with your candidates who are running for local office.
Absolutely. So one way you can influence what candidates do once they're elected is talk to them while they're still candidates. Even while we're physically distancing, candidates are still campaigning and paying attention to what potential voters care about. So like Alicia said, I'm going to show you how FCNL's website can help you engage with candidates and take action to bring about the world we seek and make a difference right here from home. Right, here we go, sharing my screen. So the first thing I wanted to show everyone was just navigating to our elections landing page, which you can find at fcnl.org/elections. This is sort of a clearinghouse of all of our policy advocacy, but also other resources on how to engage candidates on the campaign trail. And one specific page I want to highlight is our effectively engaging election candidates. This has a set of different ways that you can talk to those candidates at campaign events, organize your own campaign event, send letters. All of these are great tactics to engage those folks while they're still campaigning before they get into office. And particularly, we have this resource that we've created called Questions for Candidates, which has targeted specific questions on all of our issues that you can, stand up on at a virtual town hall and say, hi, but what are you doing about Afghanistan? What are you do? Is the AUMF on your agenda? And really put these issues on their radar so that when they do get into office, they'll remember you and you've already started building a relationship with them. So when you go to lobby them on these issues, it makes it that much easier. So I wanted to also share our new Action Center. So I'm going to find that by going to fcnl.org/Congress. You can use our Action Center to communicate directly with the people who represent you now. And actually together, I would love it if everyone followed along to take an online action together to engage with our elected officials to address police reform during these troubling times of coronavirus and violent racist policing. So after going to fcnl.org/Congress, you'll see this page. First, it'll ask you to put in your contact information to link you up with your members of Congress so that you can communicate directly with their offices. And then you'll see all of these action alerts. And the one that we're gonna choose is Tell Congress, Support Justice in Policing, which is, of course, a bill developed by the Congressional Black Caucus that has a number of really powerful police reforms in it. So I'm gonna select that. And what I'll see is a call to action describing the importance of this issue, and then some pre-written letters and talking points that are automatically addressed to my members of Congress. I put in my North Carolina address because I used to live there, so that's why you're seeing those officials. And this is really just a template designed for advocates to modify before sending. And we actually rely on some research by a fantastic organization called the Congressional Management Foundation. And their research shows that the more personalized an email like this is, the more impact it has on changing your officials' minds about a policy decision. So I went ahead and edited up this letter just a little bit on the next tab by changing the subject line and adding just a paragraph about me, my background, who I am as a constituent, and some of my experiences with policing that lead me to care so much about these dire reforms. And then once you're done editing your letter, you can scroll right to the bottom and click submit, and that'll send those right off to your members of Congress. And it also keep track of all the other people who have taken this action. So we're right about at 10,000 people supporting this particular ask. It would be great if we could reach that goal of 10,000. So come on down, y'all. Let's make sure we get this message out to our members of Congress. And one last point here, it's really likely that they will actually write you back after you send a message like this. And it's a really excellent opportunity to respond to that message, because that's a way to start a dialogue and start building a relationship with those offices. So, keeping the channels of communication open can only benefit your advocacy impact in the long run. Last resource I want to show everyone is our landing page for virtual lobbying. And I'm going to find that by going to fcnl.org/virtual or lobby from home, excuse me. And that'll take us to this page, which has a number of ways for you to start learning how to virtually lobby and go into congressional offices on a phone call, of course, and speak truth to power. So you can, fill out a form to indicate your interest, and an FCNL advocacy trainer will be in touch with you to schedule some one-on-one support. You can, let us know if you have any questions about this process, reach out to us with this form, and you can register for our regular online trainings that happen almost every Tuesday in the afternoon. You can also, if you prefer to just read a guide and learn how to do it that way, we have a wonderful written guide on each step for preparing, gathering, and actually conducting a virtual lobby visit. So I would definitely encourage you all to, in the spirit of this conversation, continue to change things from within and from without. So it's been such a great discussion tonight. It's been really a pleasure to be with our panelists, and I've learned so much just from hearing your experiences, Michael and Jasmine. And also thank you so much to our audience out there. Last note here, we really hope that you will all save the date for Wednesday, July 29th from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern for our next Quaker Changemaker event on advocacy in the arts, featuring Tom Rawson and Hassan El-Teb, two fantastic musicians and advocates working for peace in the Middle East region. So one last time, remember, together we can work to change things from within and without. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hope to see you next time.